don't touch each other, please. They go right down deep, and they have collided. So both the BWT cars collide.
So into an inside squabble between the two Williams. Looks to me like Rosberg tapped the back of Webber. That is absolutely the last thing any Formula One team wants to see.
That's Alesi and Heidfeld. I don't know what's happened, but it's the big poor Alain Prost, as if he hadn't got enough pressure on him.
Oh, we've lost a wheel. It's a racing engineering car that's ripped his left wheel off. Furious at his teammate. That will be a very fun team briefing.
Hello there, and welcome to the Grand Prix Rejects end of season Sourness Reject of the second half and Reject of the Year special edition podcast of Teammate Collision, starring myself, Jeremy, and my lovely co-host Lennart.
It is, as usual, an honor to be here, and boy, have we got a season finale to talk about.
Indeed. We are recording this on Tuesday the 14th of December, only 2 days after the season finale, because we thought, well, Lennart took the initiative and thought, why don't we, instead of, letting off steam, over time, at Christmas time, why not do it right away, as quickly as possible?
That stone gotta be squeezed while it's fresh.
Indeed. How are you doing, Lennart? Have you got any plans for Christmas?
Thank you, I'm doing fine, and for Christmas, basically I'm going to go with the classic and see my family. It's been a while. Usually it's half a month after my mother's birthday, so yeah. You can always look forward to that, and yeah, looking forward to it. Your plans?
Yeah, same. Going to see family. I mean, I'm originally from the UK. I'm currently in France, and this will be the first time with COVID and things that I'll get to see my family. So, no, it'll be very good to go back. Very good to go back. But yeah, enough positivity and happiness. Let's talk about. Let's go straight to part one, which I've got written down here on my pen and paper as end of season sourness. So, what are we going to talk about now, Lennart?
Well, obviously we have to talk about the final laps of the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which were looking like a very uneventful season finale until our poor Nicolas Latifi spun out of the race and brought forth a safety car. And the resulting mess on whether cars should unlap themselves or not, and eventually when the safety car was pulled in, what happened on that lap.
So for future people who are probably going to listen to this in our timeless classic podcast in 10 years' time, who don't know the context, will be thinking, what's going on? So Nicolas Latifi crashed about 5 laps from the end, and naturally the car was in the middle of the road, there were shards of debris everywhere, and so the safety car came out. And it seemed like, as Leonard was saying, that it was going to be one of the most anticlimactic of finishes, because, I mean, what else was there to do? We had to clean the debris, get rid of Latifi's car, and with the safety car situation, Verstappen had pitted, and with that situation there were 3 or 4 cars between himself and Hamilton. They were racing for the lead and for the championship, and so the championship was basically over. And but then it suddenly wasn't, because 2 laps from the end, suddenly all the lapped cars could unlap themselves. But not all the lapped cars, specifically the ones between Hamilton and Verstappen. So we had this very, very short period of time where suddenly all the cars between Verstappen and Hamilton were moved out of the way so that Verstappen and Hamilton were together. Verstappen had newer tires, and none of the cars behind Verstappen were allowed to unlap themselves, because we literally had about a lap and a half before the end of the race and the end of the season, when Michael Masi, the race director, announces that the safety car is coming in. So by pure convenience and total coincidence, we went from having the most anticlimactic finale in recent years in terms of end of season finales to suddenly the top 2 protagonists are fighting it out on track with the guy behind with a clear tire advantage. And I mean, what it resulted in was Max Verstappen won the race and won the championship. He got past Hamilton at the, if I'm not mistaken, it was the revamped turn.
Exactly.
At the Abu Dhabi circuit, and I mean the rest is history.
One could perhaps point out that at first the decision was made for lap cars to not take their position back, because as the midfielders were more than willing to point out, that should have happened and could have happened a few laps earlier. So it was particularly spicy because at first it looked like they were not going to go for that anticlimactic finish, but they were willing to accept it and simply said, okay, we're ending this race behind the safety car here. In the safety car period, and then they made the choice, as a couple of you guys can unlap themselves, so we have a championship decided.
Like most of this, it left a very sour taste, I think, on many people's mouths, because there were many questions, as you just said, like the complete reversal of it's the complete reversal of policy, because we've had this so much this year that we've had inconsistent stewarding. I guess that's a permanent facet of Formula One at this point, but it was inconsistency to the point of changing the decisions within 5 minutes of one another, of like they couldn't even decide what the safety car rules were for unlapping themselves, and it was obviously quite clearly done to spice up the show and la-di-da with all that, but like it was also the point of the safety car probably should have stayed out longer because there was still debris out on the track, and it was just like, nope, move all those marshals off the track, we've got a race on our hands. And I think that end of season sourness, which I brought up at the beginning, it's a result of all of this. Like the 2021 season has been, I would say, especially the first half, very, very good, and the second half has been very close, but more and more as it's gone along, it's just the artificiality has increased, and Abu Dhabi was a perfect example of just, it really did encapsulate, especially Michael Masi, the race organizer, his tenure in Formula One, and the ending of the season. I mean, at this point, this may age badly, but at this point we don't know if Mercedes are going to appeal things. We don't know if this season will end in a courtroom. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, in a way you said it, the season started off really great, but during the end it took a really, really, really bad downturn. Like, I always jokingly say that if I were theoretically running F1, we'd have 15 races a year, and honestly for this year this would have been basically perfect. I mean, I don't know what the championship standings were after race 15. I honestly don't even know what race 15 was, but something tells me it would have had the whole season, regardless of who would have actually won the title at that 15th race or beforehand, would have left the season in a much better public memory. Though on the note of the show, that is in a way worse, because okay, Formula One has this thing where officialdom is now also looking to create a great entertainment product. But when we have that situation, when we admit, okay, we have these safety rules that can also change up a race big time, that inevitably begs the question, why was there no red flag?
I mean, there is the precedent from Azerbaijan this year where they did that very thing.
Exactly. Like, I mean, Latifi's accident wasn't as bad as Verstappen's in Baku. The car was in a much safer place. The barrier were nowhere near damaged. So I guess from the point of minimal invasiveness, a red flag would have not been justified. But obviously that point is no longer one that really applies, where they look at safety cars, they look at red flags, they look at whatever, with only, okay, least amount of interference possible. Like, if that was the case, then I'd say yes, safety car and good. But again, we all know you're going to gimmick it, and if you're gimmicking it, then why not gimmick it properly, make it fair?
Yeah.
Red flag means both Hamilton and Verstappen can pick up fresh rubber, can basically have a, what would it be, 2 laps, whatever, the final shootout for the title, and then yes, it would have been gimmicky as all, but legitimately gimmicky, if that makes sense.
I love how it's come to the point in Formula One that to try and justify decisions, you have to think of what would be a slightly less worse decision, and that would be Michael Masi literally red flagging the race for no reason other than just to have a final lap shootout, and that still would have been preferable to what we got, which was, I think the point you're making here is that it's not only that they're like obviously gimmicking the race and they're obviously just like artificially creating as much drama as possible, but it's also the fact that they're doing it really clumsily. I think that's what just makes it so tragic. It's just like how clumsy the decision making is, and the fact that they did so many changes within the space of a few minutes in those final laps it's embarrassing. And I mean that's what most media outlets that I've read since the race have said, that it's just like it's an embarrassment, and who knows if knows if Masi will survive it. And
he will. That's the problem.
like I was thinking, the reason why I say end of season sourness, it's not just Abu Dhabi, but it's also I think you may correct me if you think it goes back further, but I think the beginning of it was probably Brazil.
Yeah, I would say so. Pretty much on the period where it was clear, okay, this Mercedes is ridiculously superior because of their new engine, whatever they found, which incidentally would be quite curious to learn, but that's a topic for a different day, I guess. But pretty much from that point, it was just, okay, how do we get this in a way that we have this big decider that is exciting and not just Hamilton rattling off 4 wins in a row and taking the championship?
I mean, I can entertain a few personal theories, but I think Brazil was probably where it started going south, when the whole overtaking issue came between Verstappen and Hamilton, and the stewards and everyone turned around and said that. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Masi who said at the time that the stewards were not going to intervene because Masi had not given it to the stewards as an incident to investigate. And from there was this clear kind of double standards between the top two and the rest of the field. I mean, we've complained, I think personally on this podcast, I think in previous episodes, we have complained about double standards regarding a certain L. Hamilton. And I think that Verstappen is now getting that too. And being a championship contender going into those final races, it was quite clear in Brazil, especially when he pushed Hamilton wide. I mean, I'm willing to forgive the situation in where was it, Monza, where they crashed into each other. I feel like both of them needed to get that off their chests. I feel like that was inevitable from both sides, that neither were going to give in. But I think Brazil was quite clearly Verstappen's fault, and from my perspective, I was quite happy to see Verstappen win. But I think given no stewards, I think given a more neutral steward's view, he probably would have lost to that championship this year quite considerably to Hamilton, judging by Hamilton and Mercedes' pace come those final few races. And I think that's where the sourness began, because Verstappen had a fantastic season, but the last few races he really did just start to crumble with many mistakes. Saudi Arabia, the qualifying, for example, Qatar also in qualifying, where he just did a purple sector through a double waved yellows. It's all just kind of fallen apart as it ended, and the last few races especially they took away from what would have been an excellent championship from Verstappen to a decent one, but with a huge amount of controversy and asterisks attached.
Yeah, I mean, that is the one thing that I am going to admit in the interest of fairness. When I talk about how the ending of Abu Dhabi was absolute nonsense and the race control was simply terrible, that obviously is separate from my feelings about the outcome, because I genuinely am very happy about the fact that Max won the title. I genuinely think if Hamilton had been the champion, he would have been, at the very least, the least impressive champion of this millennium. The last championship run that was as unconvincing as his would have been Mika Häkkinen in 1999. But the thing is, and of course, I openly admit, in these almost 31 years I've been on this planet, I've never had quite as much schadenfreude as seeing that one video where they show Toto Wolff's reaction throughout the entire lap from the point the safety cars called in. But the matter of fact is, this ending is still nonsense. So, in the end, I'm happy Verstappen won, because he was, if not the best driver, then pretty much by far the best driver in a championship contending car. But the reality is, this ending is just, well, a joke, and not a funny one.
Yeah, it's not a good. Yeah, I was going to say it's a bad joke. That's the sad truth of it. It's funny how such a brilliantly built up season kind of ended this way. If I was going to talk about my personal theory, and I would say that I think most of this stems back to Belgium. I think Spa marked how the second half of the season was going to go. It was they got into so much trouble. The FIA, Mazzi, and the stewards were just shown to be, well, they were shown to be openly, greedily taking fans' money and putting on a fake show for their own sake. And it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and we did our previous podcast on that. And I think since then, they have been very, very conscious about the way they're perceived. And I think they are doing everything in their power to spice up the show to make it as exciting as possible. Because I think to them, Spa was the worst thing that could happen to them. And I think now, in their minds, making as much drama as possible, making sure that Hamilton and Verstappen are in 1-2 position. It's almost like NASCAR. You know, with the last, mysteriously in the last few races, the top 4 in the championship are in the top 4 positions going into the final race on the track at all times. You know, it's almost like that. And I think that they got into a lot of trouble from Spa, and I think everything has really doubly spiraled down since then, if it wasn't already on a downward trend.
Well, I say I agree with your theory. I just would pick different starting points and slightly different motivations. I think it's not so much about trying to undo the PR damage that comes from Spa long term. Let's be honest here, people didn't talk about Spa 3 weeks after it happened, and Zandvoort was pretty much the crowd excitement and bang hype race that it was. The thing is, this goes back to, honestly, Drive to Survive and the fans that attracted, because in a way, either they want it to be or they feel they need it to be a drama show where you have controversy, hot button issues every week like it. And obviously, A, that is unsustainable, and B, it tends to put Formula One more in a, well, for lack of a better term, pro wrestling style approach, which is troublesome not just because it undermines the legitimacy of the sport itself, but see, the thing in pro wrestling is it is a weekly show or a monthly show in the smaller leagues, and one that is continuously ongoing. Like, if, for example, in wrestling the bad guy is screwing the good guy out of the title, or the hero gets his championship taken away by the officials, then he eventually gets some huge rematch and wins it back to the excitement of the crowd, whereas history will remember Max Verstappen as a 2021 world champion, even if Lewis theoretically rattles up another 5 titles in a row. So that is the problem I feel with trying to make this sport more wrestling-y.
Yeah, I agree. It's like the more races, the more episodic it's becoming. And I don't see anything in theory wrong with that at all. There's nothing wrong with episodic seasons. Some of the best seasons are the ones where every race is a gold mine for on-track action specifically. Whereas the devaluing, as you're saying, the legitimacy of the series, I think, is more related to the off-track action, towards the drama going into every race. And once again, while in theory there's nothing wrong with that, the season needs to be something which can be remembered for the actual content that it provided. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how this will age, because I don't think much of this season will age very well. It depends on what the FIA does, and it seems like after Saudi Arabia, which we haven't even spoken about, after Saudi Arabia, I think the Pandora's box is well and firmly, I mean, the lid's been blown clear off with a sledgehammer. Like, we have really entered a new era of Formula One.
Yeah, and the worst thing is, even in their legislation of the Mercedes protest afterwards, because I got the document right in front of me, but in that document they pretty much set the legal precedent, not that means very much in Formula One, but they have now pretty much set the precedent where they can pretty much adjust these lap cars things however they please, because basically, to quote, that Article 15.3 allows the race director to control the use of the safety car, which in our determination includes its deployment and withdrawal, and that although Article 48.12 may not have been applied fully in relation to the safety car returning to the pits at the end of the following lap, Article 48.13 48.13 overrides that, and once the message safety car in this lap has been displayed, it is mandatory to withdraw the safety car at the end of that lap. Now, that's where a lot of paragraphs and articles. So, to explain the point in a more simpler manner, they basically said Masi can do anything he wants with the safety car and the car's left behind it. So, I would be very positively amazed if that doesn't mean that pretty much from next year on, the lap cars will only be removed for the top 5, top 3, 4 to have single race shootouts in pretty much any race that has a late stage safety car.
There you go. I mean, I don't have anything to add to that. I mean, other than that, it's the same with the Belgian Grand Prix. It's just like, oh, we have these rules with regards to maximum times, with regards to the amount of time the race is on. Oh yeah, but we can just choose to stop the race clock. You know, we can just have 4-hour red flags. You know, that's no problem. We can have a two lap race, which counts as a race, but we're not going to count the fastest lap for Nikita Mazepin because that would make the sport seem like a joke. You know, it's like.
Of course, as far as GP Rejects is concerned, he will always have that fastest lap.
Yeah,
and we're going to mention it in his profile.
Nikita Mazepin's GP Rejects profile will be fascinating just for that fastest lap award. Not that I'm predicting he will be a reject, but I'm 100% predicting that Nikita Mazepin will not get a fourth place.
Pretty much, unless Haas's gamble on the 2022 season completely works out 100% that the Haas next year is, heaven forbid, even a race-winning car, then obviously even Mazepin will be able to stumble into a couple of 4th, 5th, and 6th, but generally speaking, no. I am going to be more, I won't say aggressive, because after all, it is side policy that a profile does not make a bad driver, so I won't say aggressive, but I am more confident in saying that he will be a reject. So if I'm proven wrong, which I know I'll be because I mentioned it, then yeah, just another thing making the episode age not so well.
Of all our predictions, which have already aged badly, I think that's one of the less bad predictions. Before we go on to next year, let's do a roundup of the year in total. I mean, I was thinking when we were going into this about like who on earth the best driver of the year has been, because I just take a quick look at the standings and you think of like, okay, Lewis Hamilton, as you say, this has not been his strongest year by far, especially the first half of the season. He made a lot of big errors and really wasn't on Max Verstappen's pace. There was quite a clear deficit in pace. Verstappen had the second half of the year, especially the last couple of races, where he really did just kind of fall apart. I think his second, first in those races really is not, how would I say, reflective of his performance. This is just like the championship runners, but then you take Bottas. He had many mistakes all season. I think he improved a little bit for a couple of races when he got his Alfa Romeo 3-year contract, but otherwise he's been just as mediocre as ever.
He's just been Bottas.
Perez, disappointment. I was expecting much greater things from him. He hasn't been bad, but he's been, I would still say he was a step up from his predecessors, Gasly and Albon, but I don't think he has been anywhere near the level of stepping up that people were, I think, expecting of him.
His performance was really a bit erratic in a way. Like, there were periods... Okay, in the first half, he was generally not good, as I said in the mid-season review. And then there was another period where he was, again, pretty much nowhere and not really even useful as a number 2 driver. But then he has a couple of good outings in the last racing. He has that mega block in Abu Dhabi where some would argue he won Max the championship by holding up Hamilton for so long that he couldn't switch tires under the safety car, because if he had enough room to do that, then obviously we wouldn't even have something to talk about, because then Hamilton would have just driven away at the restart with himself also having fresh red tires. But yeah,
I think Perez, the point I guess I'm making is that the top 4 in those top 2 teams, none of them had a perfect season.
Yeah.
And all of them had very major things you can point to and say they were bad. So, I mean, where else do we go? Lando Norris, we called him the best driver of the first half. He wasn't terrible in the second half, but McLaren's pace just seemed to evaporate after Russia, and Norris's almost win in Sochi was, I don't know what happened. It seems like the moment that happened, McLaren just disappeared for the rest of the championship. I didn't see them.
Yeah, I think Evaluating Norris' second half of the season depends a lot on whether you consider it just McLaren losing pace, because, for example, Ricciardo was doing a lot better in the second half, so the question is, was it just Ricciardo finally getting into himself at McLaren? Was Norris a bit slower, bit morally beaten after that very disappointing Sochi loss? So, yeah, that's a difficult question, honestly, and how much you rate Norris' season really depends on where you stand in that view of McLaren's later stage of the season as a complete package.
I'm not sure if I can tell you who the best driver of this year was. I think that's the point. Like my overall point here, because Gasly, for example, I think I've heard many people say that he could be argued to be the best driver of the year, and in many cases he was, but he also had lots of big embarrassments. Like I'm thinking of, the most recent one that comes to my mind was Qatar, and it was his crash which basically got Verstappen the penalty. It was he and Tsunoda seemed to have this syndrome where in quali they would crash out and ruin the laps of their sister team. And I don't want to give Gasly the driver of the year for that reason. The fact that he in many ways was a contributing factor to nearly losing his sister teammate the championship.
And another problem with Gasly is, we're going to go into that more later down the road, I think, but one of the important things for me personally to determine a driver of the year is really how well do you beat your first opponent, which in F1 cliches is always your teammate, and that is the main problem. Like, was he really that great? Was the AlphaTauri just actually on the level he performed at, and his teammate underperformed massively? So that is a very hard thing to determine. So I would agree that I wouldn't give Gasly driver of the year either, because, well, again, how can you really evaluate what he did?
Yeah. No, there you go, you've summed it up. So for me, I am not going to give a driver of the year, other than I think the only person who would deserve it would be someone like Norris. Although his second half of the year trailed off, it was definitely clearly part of the McLaren dropping off and Ferrari taking that position. Ferrari finished third in the championship, and that's something I don't think either of us would have predicted this time last year after their disaster of 2020. So, I mean, I suppose I have to have some humble pie in appreciating just Carlos Sainz's his move to Ferrari, which everyone at the time thought was the absolute worst move you could possibly do. And now look at him, he's finished ahead of both McLarens in the championship. So
I am going to actually dare give a driver of the race, and I am going to give it to Norris simply because I called him the best driver in the world across all of motorsport in the first half of the year, and while his performance took a downturn, the matter of fact is he still very emphatically beat Danny Ricciardo. I don't know what I was going to say there otherwise. And that is not an easy feat in the sport. Ricciardo is a very good driver by all accounts, even if the latter years of his Red Bull tenure saw him beaten by Max Hanley. It is very close. I also would be more willing to accept Max Verstappen because some of his errors, like the one in Saudi Arabia, were clearly pointing towards him having to overdrive a car that just was not quite on the Mercedes level anymore. But I obviously do not blame anyone who wants to dock him points for that. So that is just a personal measure of evaluating drivers. So I am going to go with Norris, hair's width over Verstappen, but honestly, it's not the most convincing driver of the year award, even if I picked Max or as you did pick no one. So yeah, I guess Norris is my driver of the year, but he shouldn't go brag too much about that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to honestly agree with your assessment. I think Verstappen, then again, as we said at the beginning, this is 2 days after the end of the championship, and we're taking in the end of the season a lot more strongly than we are the rest of the season. So
hot takes, woohoo!
Yes, so I suppose give us a month, and if we ever did a rethink, we would. I guess I would probably rate Verstappen better, but that's just how that's just how we're doing it, and you deal with it basically. I've got a list here, Lennart, of my rejects of the year. But I was thinking, do you have any particular candidates above your reject of the second half specifically? because the thing about the Reject of the Year is we want to incorporate the entire season from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And there may be a couple recent factors which you might want to bring up, which might not reference the season as a whole, but you might want to bring up.
Well, if you're talking about a reject of the last season third, obviously one name to mention is Aston Martin, because they pretty much just gave up. Understandably so, because they were pretty much caught in nowhere land, but given as they were already on a down season after their great 2020, just looking nowhere, often not always failing in Q1, which is not good, given that those normally were Williams, Alfa Romeos, and Haas's spots. So they are obviously a very good shout for a reject of the last season third. Another name would be. Oh wait, George Russell. Why did I forget that name? Anyway,
you're putting George Russell for reject for the second half.
More like reject of the last third. After his Mercedes move was fully confirmed, he seemed rather unmotivated. His heroics have been lacking. Now, of course, you could just point to the long season and say, are you seriously expecting him to be a super driver hero 23 races in a row? And that would be a fair criticism of my assessment. But like, if you raise expectations that high and then just basically become one giant farting noise in the last third, it's just not that good a look. But honestly, I may be too critical of him, but yeah, it's just something. He hasn't been very impressive, and of course there are a lot of go-to names, but as you say, they are already on the reject of the year podium for me and close to the podium, and so I don't want to repeat myself. So
I mean, for me, there's a couple of things I want to bring up. McLaren, I already did. I think their drop-off in pace was kind of hilarious because I mean, they won a race from they won a race from Ricciardo, who really just suddenly had a turnaround in pace after a disaster in the first half of the season. He won the race convincingly with Norris in second. Norris got told, don't go past him. This is our 1-2. This is it, And McLaren got their first win in 9 years. Russia comes along, Norris on pole, fastest lap, and unfortunately throws it away. I mean, I'm not going to judge the guy. It was a split. It was a last-minute decision, and he made the wrong decision, and he suffered for it. And after that, that was it. That was McLaren. It's almost like they did a BMW 2008 and just decided like, oh yeah, we won a race now. Time to focus on 2022. And they were nowhere. I mean, and they got beaten by Ferrari convincingly. Like, it wasn't even close. Sainz and Leclerc, and I mean, Sainz has been kind of a positive surprise, especially over the whole season. But yeah, like both Ferrari drivers have performed quite convincingly well, and McLaren's performances just got worse and worse and worse. I mean, Norris was fighting for 10th places by the end of the season, and Ricciardo, while he had the occasional good race, was barely improved on his first half of the season form. And I would honestly, I might even suggest McLaren for reject to the second half for that reason, that they went from being so convincingly the third best team on the grid to like fifth. Like they were slower than AlphaTauri at most points. Well, one of the AlphaTauris. And the only other thing I would bring would be, other than the end of season sourness, which is it's just so rejectful that we're just going to name the podcast that. But if I had to give a reject to the second half, I would honestly say the Spa race, the Belgian Grand Prix, was still just the worst thing, one of the worst things that's happened in modern motorsport, at least in Formula 1 that I can remember. I was going to say motorsport, but then I remembered Formula E and DTM this year, so I'm going to scale
honestly,
that back.
I don't want to. I don't want to disagree with you, but the reality is, the last third of the season and that Spa event just basically soured the season to a point where I cannot honor. Like, I can make a case it was better than the disqualification fest that was this year's Formula E season, but honestly, as much as I don't like the GT3 switch, and of course as much as that season finale was, well, team order nonsense, I cannot reasonably say that this year's DTM season was more offensive to the eyes and to the senses than this Formula 1 season was.
Okay, well, we'll have to agree to disagree there. I think your knowledge of DTM and your experience of it is more than mine. So, but we shouldn't. Once again, I always say when we have this conversation, we really shouldn't be having this conversation. We shouldn't be having the conversation of, no, my season finale was worse than yours. No.
Yeah, obviously, like we are talking about the least pathetic one, and that is not good.
Did any of those? So DTM, Formula E, and Formula One all had just like absolute trash season finales. Did IndyCar have a good season finale this year? Did you watch it?
I honestly didn't watch it. I know NASCAR had a reasonably good one, was quite a fun one, and nothing too shabby. And or to put it this way, nothing that I would say is cause for any controversy, but European motorsport did not have a good year all around.
Had an exciting year, but not a good one. Not an objectively like quality one. Damn.
Not one you want to tell your grandchildren in awe about. So.
Oh damn.
Like I remember when racing was good back in 2021. We had a couple of great series. We had so many great races and a championship decider for the ages. Of course, we're going to say that anyway because nostalgia is going to make us blind, and by the time we have grandchildren, we theoretically have grandchildren, we will be also very senile, but that's neither here nor there.
I guess let's have this conversation again in 10 years when we do our season reappraisal and see how wonderful we think the 2021 season is.
For sure.
So, the big thing. That's the reason why everyone's probably listening into this. Reject of the year.
All right. Let's start with the Reject of the Year bronze medal, and that one goes not as particular surprise to people who know me. It goes to Kimi Räikkönen. The reality is, Kimi hasn't been his best self since 2014. I think nobody's going to disagree with me on that one. But this year is really one of those years where a guy just hung on way too long. It was sort of like Valentino Rossi's season in MotoGP, where you just knew, okay, what are you still doing here? And at least Rossi was still scoring points on the regular, well, I wouldn't say close, but there was always that chance of that elusive 200 podium. And what was Kimi driving for except to, I don't know, did he become the most experienced driver in F1 history this season or the season before that?
I think he already was last season, actually, the most experienced ever driver.
Yeah, and so even if he was this season, then he pretty much could have and possibly ought to have stopped after that. Like, when Robert Kubica can come in as a COVID replacement and we basically don't notice skill-wise that Kimi is gone, then you just know it's really, 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 really sad, which in a way is, of course, the theme of his entire career by a certain point of view, but I don't want to go into that here. So, all in all, he did beat Giovinazzi in the points. That's alright, but honestly, that is the minimum standard I have for a guy to be F1 material, really, because Giovinazzi is not good. So yeah, all in all, it's just a disappointing season, one where he looked at points like he didn't even know what he was doing anymore. Haha, funny reference. Like the Portugal accident with his own teammate, the stuff in Saudi Arabia where he punted Vettel. No, well, he didn't punt Vettel out in the classic sense, but he did cause a crash that took Zeb out. And Vettel in the interview with RTL afterwards said something that was very telling of the season as a whole, when he just said, I don't know, I'm very loosely translating here, I don't know what he was doing. He probably thought the turn would go right when it goes left. So, and that is when your best friend, one of your best friends in Formula One says that about you in the media, you know you're toast.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that assessment at all. Raikkonen has been a retired old man for a long time, and he had very little pace in Ferrari, in my opinion. I know I know I'll annoy some members of the community by saying that, but he was mostly useless at Ferrari, and the fact that he won one race in a team which was a top 2 car for basically 3, I would say, of the seasons that he was driving for them, is very telling of his performance as a driver. And You were going to say something to that.
No, I actually was just agreeing with you. Like, all that needs to be said about that time period is that because of stat inflation, Vettel is still the driver with the third most wins for Ferrari. So the fact that Kimi only won one race with the cars from 2015 to 2018 is just not good enough.
Yeah, that's an insane stat. I did not know that. But going to Alfa Romeo, he had a nice 2019. He did a couple of good races, and as it always happens with Kimi, he got bored after a while, and then it was over. He 2020 and 2021, I would say combined, he's been mostly nowhere this season, especially, and this has been comparable to like Massa's 2016 when we thought that was going to be his last year, and yeah, I don't think we'll probably notice when he's gone. For me, I had one honourable mention, and Kimi Räikkönen is tied to that, and that's Alfa Romeo as a whole. The only team slower than them were Haas, and Haas weren't expected to be quick. I mean, well, Haas got 0 points all year, so it's not like they were quick. But Alfa Romeo were beaten by Williams, even without the ridiculous Spa points dishing out. They still finished behind Williams, which, although improved, were not being expected to do so well. And I'll get onto that later. My number 3 is the rookies. We brought them up in the mid-season reject podcast, and I'm going to bring them up again because I didn't see any improvement in the second half of the season. And in fact, Yuki Tsunoda, especially, who has been sort of called the number one of the rookies on the basis of default, on that he is the only one who had a car which could score points, was continuously rejected the race. He had so many disasters. It was he's been an embarrassment, and there's been so many news articles, defensive in the press, saying no, I'm moving to Italy. I'm gonna sort myself out, and I'm going to improve my pace. And everyone's like, yes, we're all supporting you, Yuki. And I just haven't seen it. I have not seen that increase in pace. He unrejectified himself in Abu Dhabi, which is, awesome for him. But I don't credit it as that one race where he finally outscored his teammate. Having you were going to bring that up, but one race in 22, he finally outscored his teammate, and without that 4th place, he would almost have been outscored by George Russell in a Williams. Yeah.
That's all. I'm going to go a bit more into that later, but
okay.
Yeah,
okay. I will go into my next rookie then, because I'm looking forward to what your number 2 and number 1 are. Folks listening at home, I have no idea what his reject podium is. So.
Yeah, we both operate basically in secrecy.
So
of course, technically, those who read in the Discord will possibly know it, but honestly, with all the at the time posting, I would not be surprised if that went completely under.
Well, it went under my radar, so at least for me. I suppose I should mention the other rookies. Michael, my goodness, Mick Schumacher. He was there. Nikita Mazepin, what else can you say about him? He had no hype going into it other than the hype that he was going to be crap, and then he kind of lowered that bar by spinning out in basically every practice session. He seemed to somewhat improve his pace in the second half, like a bit. Like there have been points in which he's definitely been on pace with Schumacher, but I mean that's kind of what is expected of you as a driver. I find it hard to rate him as a driver based on the actual quality we assign to Mick Schumacher. He's probably the driver I have no idea how to rate. I mean, some people would probably put him as their reject of the year, and I'm not sure. Maybe ask me again in 10 years. But I just glossed over Mick Schumacher because I have nothing to say about him other than that when Nikita Mazepin spun about 200 times in practice sessions, Mick Schumacher actually smashed up the chassis multiple times in actual time sessions, and I think both of the Haas pair were useless, and they're both coming back next year. So there you got something to look forward to, folks, for 2022.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment on the Haas drivers. I I'm going to go a bit more into them later, not much, but yeah. So I don't want to
slowly lifting that curtain.
Respond too much in detail. Yeah, I'm kind of giving away my podium already, but no. Let's just get to number 2 for me, and that one is going to be a bit left field because I'm giving it to Formula One's organization. To clarify, I mean both the FIA and Liberty Media. In many ways, this season has been a difficult one. Like, we are still in an ongoing pandemic. Sorry for the reminder. We are in a situation where the calendar is in flux, where you have to adjust to rules. Grand Prix were cancelled this year. So in some ways it is understandable that they struggle, but in other ways it was clear that they also chose a lot of the criticism I gave them. We again had an entire episode about the race control decision in the season finale, this one. And we also have the Spa mess, we have the inconsistent stewarding, we have Saudi Arabia, which again, I remind you, for those who haven't been on GP Rejects in a while, got our reject of the race as a whole, which is, I think, it's not unheard of, I would say, but it's been excessively rare. So, all in all, we're just looking at a scenario where the sport was not doing itself any favors, where it was influencing what was already, as far as the idea of championship contention goes, the best season since honestly 2012. Like, not even, but again, that's just my personal opinion on the Ferrari-Mercedes battle, but even those didn't feel quite as close as the war of Red Bull versus Mercedes, and certainly didn't have the heat in it, because let's just say one thing we kind of totally didn't address was Christian Horner's conduct during this entire period, which...
Yeah, we totally glossed over that, actually, now I think about it.
Yeah, which, since I did the pro wrestling analogy earlier, I might as well bring it back, was the classic heel stuff, like, oh, we didn't come with a lawyer, we fought honorably, we fought with spirit, we think this protest is unsporting and shows what Mercedes are all about, which is absolutely ridiculous, which makes him look like a complete wanker. Sorry, you're gonna have to censor that one.
No, that's staying in.
Yeah, fair enough. You're the one who's responsible for the cursing. No, but seriously, like, there was so much heat in this season battle that you could have just left it alone, but they didn't. They made the Abu Dhabi nonsense, they made the non-calls in Saudi Arabia, they made the negotiations in Saudi Arabia. And so they really messed with a good thing, and it really, really, really soured the entire year. So I'm giving them my silver medal on the Reject of the Year podium.
I'm going to 100% agree with that. I mean, I wrote down Michael Masi for my second position, but he is just... he is the one of the arbiters of this disaster. So I will agree with everything you just said, and just also write down in footnote Michael Masi. And that is all I will say.
Yeah, don't forget the exclamation mark after the footnote, because while he is the face of it all, and one could argue even the fall guy, it's ridiculous, just ridiculous.
Enough.
Yeah, enough.
What's your number one, Lennart?
My number one is Yuki Tsunoda.
Ooh,
now,
wow. Okay.
Now, obviously, as you mentioned, made the rookies their own point. There will be people asking, listening to us, why is he exempting Mazepin? Why is he exempting Mick? Mind you, they both are very close to the podium, but the reality is they only had each other to compare to, and quite frankly, that comparison was meaningless in the absolute weakest car on the grid. I am going into the season, I had, which I remind you, Reject of the Year is related to expectations. I had no expectation for either of this guy. I think very lowly of Mick. In his talent as a driver sense, as a human being, he seems pretty good, if a bit obsessed with his dad. But hey, them's the breaks. So the 2020 Formula 2 season was not a season that promised great talent coming in. So my expectations for pretty much all three rookies were low. So, yeah, Mick beat Mazepin handily, but Mazepin was always expected to be the worst one, even if his off-track conduct made people dislike him more, and therefore think even lowly of his skills as a driver. Even without that stuff, even if he had been an angel, people would not have expected very much of him. And so, yeah, Mick basically beat Mazepin up in a pretty meaningless battle, whereas Tsunoda had both the blessing and the curse of an actual teammate to compare it to. And in that comparison, he got shredded. When your own teammate says it was his late season goal to go 22-0 in qualifying against you, that is I can't even call it a statement, because that is an understatement. It is a verbal kick in the behind. That is so disrespectful. Like, you cannot tell me that George Russell was thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to go, 19-0 against Kubica? The fact that he was thinking it, that he was expecting it to happen, you're not disappointed if something unlikely doesn't happen, so he expected it to happen. And it just shows how much Gasly has pretty much been stomping on his face all year. And even his first race in Bahrain was not bad. Like, yeah, he was having a good drive, did finish with a couple of 9 points. And so obviously expectations were immediately, we got the new Japanese racing sensation. And after that, the stocks went downhill like a ski slope. And yeah, it's just, I mean, there was some discussion in the early stage along the lines of, hey, Marco saying, no, we're not going to rush this guy into Red Bull, with the obvious implication, oh yeah, he's going to be a future Red Bull driver because he's that damn good. And yeah, he's not. He is really not. And he was just a disappointment by expectations. He was erratic. He wasn't that fast. And so compared to the other rookies, he stood out very negatively. And yeah, quite frankly, so far, not looking very good for him. Liam Lawson had a great year in DTM, and to a lesser extent Formula 2. Johnny Edgar in Formula 3 was having a very decent year. So all in all, I don't see him having much of a future in Formula 1 right now, especially now that the need to appease Honda is gone. And so yeah, he's my reject of the year, and you better step it up, Yuki, or else you're out of here very fast.
Yes. So Lennart's reject of the year is Yuki Tsunoda. Yes, I think if I was to add to that at all, there's a couple of things I would say, and the thing I would say that makes Mick Schumacher stand out as probably, I was going to say rookie of the year, but it's not exactly the biggest of praise for the guy.
It's sort of like how I said earlier, how Norris shouldn't think too much about being declared my driver of the year, so Mick shouldn't particularly hype up this rookie of the year. What?
I would say, I'm reminding myself of when Ginoc wrote the 2009 review, and one of the reasons they put Nelson Piquet Jr. as the reject of that year was not just because of how slow he was, but it was also because of his attitude. What Mazepin has and Yuki Tsunoda also has are terrible attitudes on track. Mazepin also has it off track in many occasions, if you've been listening to the press releases this year. But Tsunoda has a serious lack of respect for his fellow drivers. That's what soured Tsunoda for me from very early on. There were many races, and there's a famous one in Barcelona when during practice he was just screaming at his race engineer, and his engineer was having to take this. It's like, this guy is employed to to take you around the track, make sure you're doing the best laps you can, making sure that everything's safe for you, and there was a serious amount of disrespect, and he got called out for this, rightly so. And then we had the middle half of the season, which was, Tsunoda's improving. I went over this a couple of minutes ago. But I didn't see that improvement. I didn't see that improvement in attitude either. When it came to the clash with Kubica, which was a racing incident, really, they clashed on the first lap at Monza, if I remember correctly. I don't remember if it was in the sprint or in the actual race. And just live on air, he's just calling Robert Kubica effing this, effing that, what an idiot, how dare he crash into me. And it's just like, well, no, you can't you can't talk about your fellow drivers like that. It's like you got to have some respect for the guy. I mean, this guy outpaced Kimi Räikkönen of all people. So but my point still stands. I think the thing I don't like about Tsunoda is his attitude. He doesn't respect his fellow drivers, and for that I agree that he definitely should be on the at the very least on the podium.
Yeah, that is actually one thing I completely failed to address now that you mentioned it. The thing is, okay, I'm somewhat inclined to give people a pass when they have incidents and other stuff on the team radio, because I think that's just the heat of the moment. We all have moments. Well, we are obviously not racers, so we don't have moments during the race, but when we, for example, play an online game, we get a bit heated and give it 5 minutes and we are probably talking and laughing about it. So I'm generally cool with being hostile towards other drivers. Like, that just happens. We have this infamous 2014 fight. Was it 2014? I think it was 2014, between Vettel and Alonso at Silverstone, where they both basically screamed their head offs into the team radio. So I am willing to generally give people a pass on that, because simply, again, heat of the moment. But the thing is, the part with the race engineer, that is something I really dislike. As you said, he's doing a valuable job, both for your safety and your success. And then you owe the guy a basic amount of respect. Even there, you can get heated. Sometimes things just happen. Like, for example, take the infamous, I know what I'm doing. At least there, Kimi just was being sarcastic. Like, okay, you can shut up, man. Like, he could have worded it more politely, but hey, whatever. But this screaming your head off thing is just completely uncalled for. Even Hamilton, when things don't go his way, like, yeah, you guys screwed my race, whatever. Even that is more than made up by when he wins, he usually has this almost excessive congratulations, tells everyone how great of a job they're doing. So that is something that I can live with, so to speak, even if it's not ideal. But Tsunoda just has been it's going to sound harsher than I mean it, but he's been an ungrateful brat towards his race engineer early in the season.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's all the criticism and none of the gratitude. That he hasn't brought any gratitude. Admittedly, he hasn't had the success to bring the gratitude with, so so that's also his fault, though. Okay, my reject of the year is someone else. It is Antonio Giovinazzi, and the reason why I'm giving him the reject of the year is because I already put him for one of my reject of the year nominations last year in 2020, and he has been totally useless. He has been probably more useless than Kimi Räikkönen, and at best you could say that he matched Kimi on pace this year. Kimi, to remind those of you who are listening, is 42 years old, retiring at the end of the year, and hasn't had motivation since probably 2012. And Giovinazzi has been there at Alfa Romeo on the basis that he's Italian, and there is a dearth of Italian drivers on the grid, and he just happened to be the right person at the right time to take that job. He had not really a very convincing 2019, a horrible 2020, and another horrible 2021. He is a seat filler if ever there was one. And the thing that makes him worse than Kimi is the fact that he has had the potential, which has been unfulfilled, to actually get decent race results. If he had actually fulfilled the promise that he had in Monza, in the Netherlands, in many of those races where he actually qualified decently, he would have easily overhauled Williams in the points. He would have easily been kept on, judging by the fact that they obviously wanted him to stay on. But he threw away every result. Once again, he was very ungrateful about the fact that he got fired, when really it's a miracle that he stayed on as long as he did. I think no one will miss him. I don't think he's brought anything of interest. I can't imagine ever writing an F1 article about him, like a driver profile, because I don't think there's anything to say. I think the most impressive thing he ever did was lead a lap or two at Singapore in 2019 on the basis of other people pitting. And beyond that, I think he'll be a total footnote in Formula One. And I'm being incredibly harsh here, but Giovinazzi, will anyone remember him in 6 months?
I don't think so. I mean, The most memorable thing about him are his relatively decent looks, but honestly, he is not the only F1 driver looking good. Comes with the territory of being an athlete. But outside of that, no, you pretty much nailed it. Yeah, the thing is, with Giovinazzi, that is again, because I would have mentioned him in the part where we talk about people would have expected on our podiums. He basically has the same saving him from the podium that Mick and Mazepin have, and that my expectations for him were at the start of the year buried 6 feet under. As you said, he didn't look good in his first year. He didn't even look in his substitute stint at Sauber back in 2017. So all in all, yeah, the guy was nothing, is nothing, and will probably, well, he's now off to Formula E, but I expect in 5 years he'll be in GT racing, which is the motorsport equivalent of returning to nothing. So all in all, yeah, just a waste of a spot, as you mentioned. In a way, made more harshly, because like if we had 13 teams, if we had 14 teams, if we had, hell, even if we had 12 teams, like one wasted seat is not such a bad thing, but with only 20 seats available, pretty much every guy needs to contribute something more than just their nationality. Like Zhu has money, Mazepin has metric tons of money, so they aren't just there for the nationality factor, they are there because they bring money. So, and Giovinazzi is just, yeah, he was just there.
And like Schumacher, I have nothing more to say really on him. It's just like he was there, and I don't think he contributed anything. I think it's Giovinazzi is my reject of the year. Feel free to disagree. I know there's many of you who will probably say it's Mazepin, and I'm not going to disagree with that either, to be honest.
Yeah, obviously Mazepin didn't win any friends. He was very, very bad. So obviously it's perfectly valid to give him the reject of the year, as we have had throughout the history of the site many different reject of the year types. The one that were just there, like you mentioned, Giovinazzi to be, when we're talking about, say, Wurz in 2000. Then we have the dysfunctional reject of the years, like Honda in 2007. So yeah, there are many ways to look at it. So Giovinazzi is Mazepin is as valid a choice as Giovinazzi, as Tsunoda, so that's the beauty of it all. So there are many ways to look at this.
Okay, on that note, I would say we can probably finish. I would say thank you very much to everyone for listening to us two dudes ramble about Formula 1 in 2021. We did this a little bit early. I think originally we were probably going to do it in January, but we thought, why not just do it nice and early, right when we have the season fresh in our minds. And let us know what you think. Let us know if you disagree. I'm sure most of you probably do, because that's the way our opinions usually work. Let us know what you think. We're going to post this up on the forum and things, and we're probably going to do a little shake around of the old podcasts and put them up on YouTube. But we'll keep you informed of that as it happens. And comment, tell us what you think, and tell us what your reject of the year podium would be, and
have a great time.
Yeah, any closing statements for 2021 and for the forum in general, Lennart?
Well, it's been a year in many interesting ways, Jeremy. We have a lot of new content. We got the site back up in the first place. Thanks, by the way, to Miguel for his hard work on that. I want to mention him explicitly, but obviously thanks to everyone in the community who contributed to the great year we've had. Thanks to everyone who has read our stuff, listened to our podcast, and again, thank you so much for your interest in GP Rejects, and I hope we can make 2022 as great a year on that front. And all in all, I am going to close out the 2021 year and season in motorsports with the saying, or with the feeling, namely the feeling that this was, both in the positive and in the negative way, a very exciting year.
I can agree with that. for me, I'd say thank you again. Yeah, thank you everyone for, thank you Miguel again for giving me the opportunity to write these race reports and for generally taking the initiative. You too, Lennart, you also took the initiative when it came to beginning of the year and letting me do my passion, which is writing. I've been doing the race reports all year, and I've started doing driver profiles this year. We got another one coming probably very soon, probably not too long after this podcast. Thank you to all the community members who have contributed in general, and I mean the rest of you who I've chatted to on the voice chat and things with our R-Factor competition. You all know who you are, and thank you very much for being there this year, especially during COVID with lockdown and people being inside. It's been wonderful to have the company, and the community has been absolutely fantastic. And those of you who are not on it, we are on Discord. So if you go on our website, you can easily find our link to our Discord community and come and join us. It's a lot of laughs.
If this ends up on YouTube, it will also be links in the description for everything. And obviously, Jeremy, I need to thank you as well for all the effort you put into editing the gravel traps throughout the year. And I'm looking forward to starting again in 2022. I'm going to take January off to refill my creative juices on the gravel trap. But other than that, I think, again, 2022 is going to be an interesting year in many ways, both in the sport world and outside of the sport world. And so, again, thank you, everyone. I love you, and stay safe throughout the holidays. And, yeah, see you in 2022.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you in 2022.
Goodbye, and always remember, where teammates are close, teammates collide.
It was this season. This was the first season of their pairing, and kind of one of the most interesting things if you're thinking about a what-if scenario. As we all know, if is Formula 1 spelled backwards. But a what-if scenario would be what if Red Bull had picked Verne over Ricciardo? Because Verne had a pretty good 2012, and as far as I know, he outscored Ricciardo.
Yeah, it's been quite close between the two pretty much throughout the entire time, and I am 90% convinced that to this day that the final decision on who got to replace Webber in 2014 was made by a coin toss.
Yeah.
Helmut Marko just picked a coin, had Verne tails Ricciardo, and well, it landed on tails apparently.
The thing is, I think that Verne was more consistent than Ricciardo, but Ricciardo had far more. He had one or two moments where I remember he qualified very well at Bahrain. And I was going to say, I remember he crashed into Vettel, but that's not a good thing in Abu Dhabi that year. But Ricciardo had one or two moments where he shone, and Verne was always very consistent. And it always gets me thinking, ultra fans of F1 as people who are very into the niche and people who really, really care, and really try to work out the answers to everything when it comes to F1. We're thinking about Verne and going oh, he was far more consistent, he had this, he had that. And I think the people who actually decide who gets the seat, are they actually just looking at the TV and going, hey, yeah, but Ricciardo got 5th in quali that one time, we should hire him instead? Do the people who actually hire the drivers only hire them for the chance that they could do really well, more than the idea of consistency, more than the idea that they're actually generally really good overall? Because I feel like Verne lost an entire career on the basis that he was pretty good. And he never broke that upper limit when he was in F1. He was always pretty good.
To be honest, I think that's something that comes with the nature of the Red Bull driver program. They've always pretty much been looking for the next big thing, even to their own detriment. If we think about their most recent failures, Kvyat, Albon, Gasly, none of them were particularly capable of challenging day in, day out, but each of them had shown flashes, and I guess maybe it's because of Vettel, when he won in 2008, that he raised the standard for what Red Bull Junior should do to a point where it's simply not reasonable, and simply created this mindset, okay, someone who has this one big impact moment is going to be a star, is going to be a champion, is going to be the future, and, well, the numbers don't lie. So sometimes it's just more important from what I would say, if I were a hypothetical team manager, that there's an internal consistency in it all.
I was thinking about even just a couple of years after Vettel debuted, you can take people like Buemi, who had basically no testing whatsoever, and Alguersuari, and other drivers like Verne, who didn't have nearly as much of the... I don't want to call it pampering, because it's not pampering. It was just a different era. Vettel had a situation whereby he had so much testing, and he even got a one-off drive with BMW before he got into F1.
Plus, it should be noted that not only did he get that one-off drive, he had the weekly test sessions. Like, when was the last time AlphaTauri Toro Rosso had a Friday test drive for any noticeable amount of time?
Yeah.
Because I honestly can't recall it. So, yeah, it's just so much more experience. He was probably, even at his young age, was he much further along than pretty much all the Red Bull youngsters you mentioned. So
They're given the expectations of someone like Sebastian Vettel with like half of the resources and like nowhere near as much time. It's very sad actually how so many careers have basically been put on a treadmill, which is, I guess, getting faster. It's like, oh, Vettel did this in 10 seconds, now you can do it in 8. It's like, but I haven't had any practice. Okay, who cares? This is the way we're doing it now because Vettel did it, so now you can do it. It's very unfair and very, very strange system that they have. It's something I've never really understood, other than the fact that they're obviously trying to get that best ever talent in Verstappen or Vettel. I mean, Verstappen's the only one it's worked with since Vettel, and that they've had to sacrifice an entire generation of drivers to get Verstappen to the top of the Red Bull team.
yeah, but if he, as is very much possible, wins this year's championship, I think Red Bull will argue that it is worth it, even though, rationally speaking, it kind of is not. But the thing is, that is one ugly truth about the Red Bull driver program. Many of the drivers in it would honestly have never seen Formula One without it.
No.
I mean, let's be real. Okay, Alguersuari had the CESPA money, or CSPA, I have no idea whether it's an abbreviation or a name. But outside of that, Buemi was, I think, also reasonably loaded, but Ricciardo had no money. Kvyat had some money, but not that much, really, if I recall correctly. Albon didn't have enough money, so yeah, it's pretty much lose for some of those youngsters. Either deal with Red Bull's extreme demands or just not get into F1 at all. And that's the problem. Too many driver programs in turn never get you a proper F1 shot. I mean, let's not even start about Mercedes' cluster
Oh, geez, yeah.
of a driver program.